Okay, well, thanks everybody for coming out to join us today. It's a beautiful morning there in the UK. I can see a beautiful evening in New Zealand and another hot, beautiful day out here in the tropics in Malaysia. Really excited to have today's webinar continuing in the area of team sports with a pretty incredible group of speakers here. We're really lucky and blessed to have Matt Brown out of the Paris Saint-Germain Performance Department, who is with us now, from Paris. And Dr. John Cronin, as always, our LILA head of research, who works closely with Matt and PSG on the research out of AUT Springs, and of course myself, Joe, the CEO of LILA. We're going to be dumping into a bunch of topics in the area of tech and team sport. But before we do, I just want to give our speakers to give a little more introduction to themselves and their area of focus there at their respective organizations. Matt, why don't you take lead? And again, thanks so much for joining us today. Tell us a bit about yourself.
Yes, I'm Matt. I'm the Academy Sports Scientist at Paris Saint-Germain. I'll be going into my 5th season with the club very soon after the end of season break. I'm responsible for the training load planning and periodization, as well as data collection, management and visualization. I'm also the S&C coach for the reserve team here. And alongside this role, I'm studying for a doctorate with an aim to assess the benefits of using the LILA exoskeleton for football training.
Cool. And you said you're currently in Paris. You've been there 5 years already.
I've been here, so it'll be my 4th year, but I kind of arrived mid-season for my 1st season, and then kind of obviously going into the 5th season now.
And we were just talking, you're pretty happy. Everybody's happy back home with UK in the Final Four.
Yeah, it's been a good tournament so far, so hopefully it can carry on after tomorrow.
Yeah, cool. Well, again, Matt, it's exciting, especially because now, we'll talk more about that, but you and I and myself and PSG, we've had this going on for several years. So we've got real fruit being born out of it now. And it's pretty exciting to be at this point, finally, where we've got great information to share on some pretty cutting edge stuff. And on that, please, John, introduce yourself as well. You've been front and center with our research for the last many years, but share yourself with the team, with the community.
Yep. Hi, everybody. John Cronin here. I'm a professor in strength and conditioning at AUT University, and I'm also head of research for LILA. Most of my role is at the uni involves postgrad supervision. I've got about 15, 16 PhD students that are doing cutting edge research, and I'm lucky that I can direct quite a bit of that manpower into LILA wearable resistance research. And so the other part of my role is really trying to keep an eye on what's happening around the world in terms of the wearable resistance research. We've got a hell of a lot of stuff happening in a lot of countries all around the world in a multitude of sports. So just trying to keep on top of that and making sure we're not duplicating research and making sure everything's novel, original, and gets shared.
Yeah, and I'll just say right now to anybody who is listening has a specific research interest, reach out directly to John. He oversees the research for us. He makes the selection on the teams and programs we work with, and he knows there isn't much research going on in this area around the world that he's not somehow a part of or aware of. So he's definitely the first person to reach out with. And we're always looking for great programs and people to share and delve into this even further. I mean, we're just getting started. Myself, of course, the CEO of LILA, and I'm the creator of the EXOGEN tech. I've been in the high performance game for almost 35 years now, and formerly from Canada. Worked in the NBA, many of our pro programs and national programs back there, and ended up out in Asia with National Sports Council Malaysia for many years, hence my base out of Kuala Lumpur. And JC and I first met, I think about 5-6 years ago. We were both doing some presentation for National Sports Institute here. And we had dinner, and I showed you the concept, and you were intrigued from the beginning.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and I remember because we shook on that. We said we need a research partner, and that was the very first partnership LILA set up, is to make sure that we had really high-level research and research-backed benefits behind the product. Because there's, especially as an S&C and a performance coach, and Matt, you know it, every day you just get inundated by people with new tech and new kits. And then when you ask tell us a little more about it, you realize some are done very well, some not so well. And we're really conscious here at LILA that EXOGEN needed to have that strong research backing. And that goes back with PSG. I was first reached out by Martin Boucher, who contacted me, I think, almost 3 years back. And I remember it was because we had a sale with French Rugby at the time, Sevens program, and French Rugby they had been speaking with Martin and the guys there at PSG. I think they shared a couple of pieces of the EXOGEN kit. Martin said some of the players, Cavani and a few guys, were really excited. They liked what they saw. And so that I flew over to Paris, and we've now got some real excitement going out of it. Tell us, Matt, a little bit about that sort of initial engagement with us and what you thought about wearable resistance, at the start and now, several years later.
Yeah, absolutely. So kind of my first experience with wearable resistance came kind of before LILA, where you have the traditional weighted vests, ankle weights, even kind of putting rocks in a rucksack and going for a run, to increase that in training intensity. However, when I first saw the LILA product, I realized it was kind of a completely new adaptation to this training concept. First impressions were the product itself looked really kind of slick, it fit really well with the compression garments that the load is fixed to. The weight of the load and the load orientation, as you know, are completely customizable. All of the surfaces on these compression garments can have load fixed to them. So it's completely your decision how you load yourself, with what load, where you place it. And I soon realized upon using it myself, because I kind of wanted to build up experience of using it personally before I get to the players here. You do not need a heavy load to increase the intensity of the training session. So because the product looks to use high velocity to carry out training with small loads to increase those force outputs. So therefore, kind of using a relatively small load of only 1 to 2% body mass during high speed running, I thought really increased the difficulty of the training. And so while the product, it made a really good first impression on a personal level, the important thing for us and the performance department here was to get the buy-in from the technical staff and the players. And the first thing that I thought that really helped with that was the speed that you can put the shorts, the calf sleeves on, the speed that you can fix the loads to those calf sleeves. Because probably a lot of the guys listening, you guys will know too, training centers before training are really busy places. The players are there, they need to see the physios for massages or to get straps. They normally have team meetings, they might have like a pre-training injury prevention workout. So as a performance team, we kind of have 5 to 10 minutes every morning to give the players GPS units, heart rate monitors, and the exoskeleton as well. So it was great that within kind of 1 minute, the players could have the shorts or the calf sleeves on and could be fully loaded. And it was one of those things that they could become autonomous with as well. So we could we could just put them in the dressing room and the players would take them and they would come out onto the training field wearing whatever they needed to be wearing. And then in terms of training, we started off kind of very slowly. We introduced it to the warm-ups. Then we kind of had like a 4-week program where we started off with the warm-ups, and by the end of that 4 weeks, the players would be wearing the LILA for entire training sessions. And this kind of slow but steady overload of building up the LILA is something as well I thought gave us buy-in and confidence from the technical staff and players, because they realized that it was not affecting them technically. So when they were wearing the LILA, they thought, okay, it's not affecting my ability to pass, to shoot, to perform as I normally do. But also some of the players are saying after a while they completely forgot they were wearing them because they feel like normal football socks. So they carry out the training as normal and they don't even realize they're wearing LILA. So I think these kind of things had a really positive first impression for me on a personal level, but also for the players and the technical staff. So we kind of had that that buy-in and confidence for us to then implement training programs using LILA.
It's funny you mentioned that, because that's question number one everybody asks, and everyone knows this from new tech, from when polar heart rate monitors came out to GPS units. You know, all us S&C guys and high performance guys loved it because the information we knew it could give us. Coaches had no interest in it because they just don't have any time for it. And so everything needed to be a really elegant solution, right? It's got to be quick, it's got to be easy, it's got to have value, but it can't undermine that time, like you said, that nobody has any more of. And that's question number one, is like, is it easy to use? I remember it was Minnesota Vikings who said to me before they jumped on board over there with Mark Uyema, and he said, when I first saw the kit, I thought, okay, it's got good value, but it looks really complicated. And he said, but nothing could have been further from the truth. Once you get it and you put it on, it kind of just makes sense, right? And the players, they feel it. Like,
yeah, it's one of those things where, as you say, at the beginning, it does look quite complex. But as soon as you put that on, and as soon as you realize that you can train as normal with this kit, I think that's when it clicks for people that, okay, I can effectively do strength and conditioning while I'm doing my normal football training.
right.
It's almost like molding those two worlds into one, which is like a really new concept, because before with wearable resistance, there were like big clunky pieces of the kit that you couldn't do any sport specific exercises with. You wore a weighted vest to do some pull-ups or something like that, but you were never going to be able to wear a weighted vest on the field.
Yeah.
But now with LILA, it's easy. It takes absolutely no time at all to put on and to take off as well. So the guys in the field, they don't mind if we only wear it for certain aspects of the training, because it still isn't impacting on the rest of the training, so that they're happy.
Well, and that's kind of checkbox number 1 and 2. And I know, having been at the pro and amateur Olympic level team sport, is 1, this isn't going to put a big time burden on us, and 2, it's not negatively affecting technique. And JC, I think this is, before we get into some of the specific research, this is literally the first research we did on EXOGEN. If you remember back, right? We wanted to sort of look at even just running, jogging, sprinting. If you put this on, does it negatively impact technique in sport and movement? And of course, we knew from trials, and I knew because I've had 17 years of time with the product, I knew it didn't because I've seen it, but we wanted to validate that. And those were, and maybe you can tell just talk a little bit to those 2 points if you can. 1, on how it doesn't affect technique and what we found out of the research and what you published. And 2 is what you just mentioned, the concurrent training that's now happening, the complex training, where we're building S&C into playtime, game time, practice time, and finding it's a really effective tool, as we'll get to later on in like congested schedules, travel, when it's really difficult to find S&C time. JC?
Yeah, like I think there's 2 questions that everybody asks. One is around technique, and the second one, and maybe the most important one, that people get worried about injury. And so what we've had to do over time is really understand those 2 questions and allay any concerns. And we have over time. The technique thing, we've seen you have to put on a substantial amount of wearable resistance on the lower limbs to see any disruption in technique. So we're quite comfortable with the loads that we are using, around 1, 2, 3% body mass. You're going to see minimal disruption in running technique. Okay, so, and there's a stack of research in the 1990s to the research that we are producing at the moment that show there's very little technique breakdown, and certainly not significant.
Yeah.
The other one was the injury concern. A lot of people go and thinking, well, okay, we're actually putting additional mass on these athletes, and so therefore we know that during the landing forces are the forces that cause the injury. So if we actually put in additional mass on the athletes, we're going to increase the landing impact forces, and so therefore there's the potential for injury. And without slides or anything like that, we've proven through, and not we've, again, the research is out there showing that the landing forces during jump training and during running are not increased significantly either. And it's just mainly because as soon as you put wearable resistance on somebody, they don't jump as high, or the rise and fall of the center of mass is not as high. And so therefore the acceleration due to gravity on them is less, and so therefore their impact forces are pretty much the same as the unloaded, but the propulsive forces are the ones that get overloaded. So both those concerns
the in-air
are,
mechanics,
yeah,
rotational forces, right?
yeah, the rotational forces, but that we can talk a bit about that a little bit later on. But the biggest things is we have allayed two major concerns of people: technique and injury. And we've got a stack of evidence to show that.
And now you said we just recently published another study in running, jogging, on concurrent gains in strength and running times with wearable. Now, it's not football, but it's exactly lays to the fact that what Matt was mentioning about it being a solution for congested or time-sensitive schedules.
Yeah, like it was a fascinating. It was single subject design, so it has its limitations, but at the same time, he was a distance runner, and we just asked him to use it as part of, because we've always said that using wearable resistance is exactly that. It's resistance training in the activity that you're doing.
Right.
So for this runner, he just used it as part of his long, slow distance runs twice a week, and he was doing 10 to 12 Ks. But what we're really interested in, did he change the strength during those runs? And we got the isokinetic dynamometer out, and we did all the hip strength and knee strength testing. And a lot of the measures, not all, but a lot of the measures that we took, 75% in the hip and 50% of the knee measures, we got increases in strength over and above, what's called the two standard deviation method. So they were quite observable changes.
Right. And again, I think just for people to know, we have a research booklet which includes every 3 months it's updated. There's currently over 30 studies in this area that have been published by JC and the team, and Matt's going to get into one of them that's going to publishing now. But you can always reach out to us. We're happy to share that. That's on the website. There's a lot of good data and good information to read, and we're more than happy to share it. And so moving ahead now, let's jumping into kind of the topics of the day. I'm going to jump into share screen. Two things we want to do, you guys, for the audience that's listening. Let me just share this. So we've got a few things prepared for you. Let's just bear with me. So what is wearable resistance? Now, you've heard a little bit about it. This is a short video clip, and it's not to promote the product so much as let you understand exactly what this is. It's not a weighted vest. It's very light micro loads. It's as light as 50 to 100 grams. And just to clarify what JC and Matt said, now I consult with programs all over the world, have for years, and most athletes are not even using 1% of body weight would be a heavy load for a lot of athletes, like the sprinters, the tennis players, the rock climbers, the basketballers. Some of these guys are using just a few ounces on the right piece of kit, but they're using it for long periods of time. So we just got a little clip that shows you the products in use, and then it just helps you, the listener, understand it as we get into the technical detail. One sec. Should work. Okay. Bear with me here. There we go. This is just a YouTube video on our YouTube channel, obviously. Don't know why there's no sound, but we will just let it play.
Has anybody seen that?
Are you seeing it?
No, we're not seeing the video at all.
Okay, hold on. You know why? I've got to reshare screen. Just bear with me here. Because you know what happens with Zoom is as soon as you go to a new screen, you have to reshare. Okay, let me share screen again.
I didn't know whether to say something. I was just wondering if I was the only person in the world not seeing this video.
Yeah, sorry about that, folks. You too, JC.
It took courage. It took courage.
Kid, you were that right guy, JC. I don't know why there's not volume, but just you can see the video. Can you see it now?
Yeah, I can. Thank you very much.
All right. And again, it's modular. You wouldn't put a full suit on an athlete. You use the right piece for your kit. You know, if you're a footballer, you're in the legs. If you're in baseball, you're in the arms, martial arts, body. And it's got full compression support. It's been well designed to fit and move with the human body. And those weights are really the secret. And as Matt said, you can stick that on anywhere you see black. So pretty much any part of the body. And they don't come off. They're pretty bulletproof. It's a NASA technology with a special type of Velcro system. It took years to kind of get that working. So there's no fear. And Matt, you can talk about that. These loads aren't falling off on the field, not even at high speed. And of course, the kit's designed to go with you and be portable, which, as you said, Matt, it's really important that programs find this stuff easy to use. This just shows it being used. Like, again, you can do full impact on a bag, movement without restriction in the bowl, loaded where you want. Even in the pool, we work currently with some of the best Olympic swimmers in the world and starting to get into the special forces area. Golf's a big area for us right now. And of course, just fitness, you know, your S&C work, adding weight into whatever you're doing specifically or generally. So, all right. Should have a good idea about the product from that, JC?
Yep.
All right, so let's go back to share screen. We'll open up go back to, and let's jump right into this study, Matt. Just gonna move us through. Tell me if you can see the screen. You okay?
We're good, Joe.
Okay, I'll move us through here. I'll come back to that slide later, JC. I think we'll talk about that towards the end. All right, Matt, lead the way.
Thank you. If you could go to the next slide, please. Just start with the perfect. Thanks. Yeah, so this is the first study that I carried out using LILA, entitled Wearable Resistance during high-speed running, and it was looking at the effects of different loads and loads orientation. So, as we know, the ability for footballers to perform repeated high-speed runs has been shown to be critical to their on-field success. So high-speed running is in the form of HIIT, so high-intensity interval training, is a popular method to prepare football players for the repeated high-speed running game demands. And potentially, with the use of wearable resistance, this style of training could be further adapted to increase the training load via performing it. So this study was carried out to better understand the effects of different wearable resistance loads and loads orientation during high-speed running and stride, to look at the effects on stride kinematics and muscle activation. So you go to the next slide, please.
And just to clarify, everybody, when you say load orientation, what we mean by that is load position. You can see the load has different shape. I've actually got a load, and I think this is a question we got. I actually had a talk this morning. So your load, this is one of those PSG loads, but you see the load has a belly and a tail. And so where the heavy end goes determines a lot in movement, right? Whether it's on the inside or the outside of the body. So how you orientate that really it can affect movement in a very unique way. So load orientation simply means that position, front, back, side, internal, external.
So for the work we've been doing with the club, we've taken particular interest in the calf sleeves. There was a couple of reasons for this. The first being that practicality aspect of the calf sleeves. You know, they're really easy to give to the players. They're really easy to put on and take off, whether that be before training, within training, and the same with the load. You know, you can very quickly fix that whenever you need to.
Right.
And the other reason behind using calf sleeves was that we wanted to target strength and power adaptations of the lower limbs, and in particular the hamstrings and quadriceps. So if you could go to the next slide, please. Thanks. So yeah, just before showing you exactly how we did the study, I wanted to briefly look at an example that was given to me by John when he was first showing me kind of the benefits of the LILA exoskeleton. It's looking at the kinetic energy cost of a back squat compared to high speed running with the exoskeleton. So kinetic energy is half, the equation for this is half the mass times the velocity squared. So if you look at a back squat of 100 kilos and it's carried out at 0.58 meters a second, that's around about what you'd expect a back squat of 70% of your 1 rep max to be carried out at. And this gives a kinetic energy output of 17.4 kilograms per meters per second. Whereas if you look at the exoskeleton, where we're only using 1 kilo of load, but we're carrying this movement out at 6.1 meters a second.
Yeah, that's the difference.
Yeah, so for those who are kind of used to looking at GPS metrics, this will be classed as a high speed run at about 22 kilometers an hour. You're getting a higher kinetic energy output of 18.6 kilograms per meters per second compared to the squat. So, however, of course, there are complications with this. You know, a back squat is a very uniform movement, specifically designed to increase the lower limb's ability to produce maximal forces. Whereas the exoskeleton, the load can be placed all over the body. It can be placed asymmetrically if you want it to be. And there's also that freedom of movement with the exoskeleton where you can use it in team sports. And often these movements can be carried out in chaotic and uncontrolled environments. And we found things as simple as placing the load distally, so on the lower limb, so towards the ankle, feels heavier than if you were to place the load towards the knee, so more proximally. And this, and John will explain this better than I will later, but this is to do with increasing the inertia. So as that load is placed further away from the hips or the knee, so the rotational center,
right,
is it going to increase that inertia, and so the load itself feels greater. And there's long been debate about the specificity and the transference of traditional S&C, such as performing back squats, to that on-field performance. So potentially with the research we're doing, we're going to investigate to see if the exoskeleton can be used either as kind of like a middleman of transference, or if it can be used as a complete alternative to traditional S&C. And hopefully studies like the ones that we've been carrying out here will be able to answer some of these questions.
JC, was there anything on that slide you wanted to say? Or?
No, Matt, you did a really great job. It's what it comes from a work energy theorem. It's physics, okay? And this is the beauty about the wearable resistance. It's all based in physics, so you really can't argue with it. But the work energy theorem says the amount of muscular work you do is related to the energy associated with the exercise. Okay, so if you get more kinetic energy into an exercise, you do more muscular work, or vice versa. And so Matt explained that really well. And that velocity is, you can see it's exponential, it gets squared. So as soon as you start doing a drill at 50% versus 70% versus 100%, you've got a different beast because of that, the velocity being squared.
And if I could add something to that, and this is why our recommendations, one thing we've learned in many years of doing this is when we make recommendations to you to start light, follow them. Because two things I always get is people put the kit on, and because we're so used to thinking of weight training as heavy weight training, right? We want to feel that with the load immediately when we engage with it, whether it's a dumbbell in your hand or a tubing or a vest or a bar. We're so used to the feeling of weight that if that doesn't register, we think it's not enough. And you know, this was Dennis Mitchell's group with Justin Gatlin and all those guys just in the last couple of months, my work with them. And he said, you know, they put it on them on the track, and the first thing they all said is, I can't even feel it. And then they did a few runs. And of course, these guys are moving at the fastest movement speeds possible. And then all of a sudden they came back to coach and they said, oh, you're right. Let's just stay with 200 grams. That's enough. Because, you know, they were experiencing something very different, and that's high speed loading. And so I think just one thing I wanted the people to know is It's not free weight training. A high-speed load moving at a light load moving at high speed can have a lot of effect on the body. And if you follow the simple light guidelines, you know, you'll go all right. But it's because of that formula, you can see where that energy is coming from. It's all in the speed component. Anyway, next slide.
Yes, please. Thank you.
There's Martin.
Yeah, so in terms of how the study worked, so we had 10 well-trained participants, and they completed a workout of 10 sets of 3 10-second runs at 18 kilometers an hour. And those 10 sets, so for every one of those sets, participants performed this with a different load. And the important thing for us was that they didn't know what load they were using at that time, so that we didn't kind of get any learning effects or psychological effects on their running. Muscle activity was measured using EMG for most of the hamstring and quadricep muscles, as well as the glutes. And we used back-mounted accelerometers to measure contact time, peak force, step frequency, and vertical stiffness. So if you could just go to the next slide, please. So, yeah, so we used 5 wearable resistance loads. So we had the control without load, obviously, to compare between 2. We then compared 0.75% of body mass against 1.5% body mass. We looked at proximal versus distal loading. So proximal being closer to the knee. So yes, photo B and C. So B is distal loading and C is proximal loading.
Right, and you could see the belly's down here and all the weight is lower down on the leg. And actually that's why those loads are that design, that belly and tail. So you can have some dispersal and continuity, but you can target an area. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah. And then we also looked at the differences between anterior and posterior loading. So kind of the front of the leg and the rear of the leg.
Where's and D here, this is, oh yeah, so here's anterior front calf on the shin, on the shank.
Yeah, so we compared kind of B and D for this condition. And then finally, we had a look at unilateral loading. So loading one leg and keeping the other leg without load. So that's photo E, yeah. See if you go to the next slide, please. So the main findings for this were the effects of 1.5% body mass loading on stride frequency was slightly higher than the effect of 0.75% body mass loading. Stride frequency also showed small to moderate increases for all of those loading placements that we discussed compared with control. Distal loading caused an increase in the quadricep muscle activity compared to proximal loading. And then the unilateral loading actually showed us a lower muscle activity for one of the quadricep muscles compared to that unloaded leg. So if you could just move to the final slide, please. Thanks. So yeah, so these findings suggest that by increasing wearable resistance load, it's possible to modify running mechanics and reduce neuromuscular activity during high-speed running. And then we found that distal loading placement can increase neuromuscular load without causing differences in running mechanics in comparison to proximal load placement. So in terms of practical applications of this, so by increasing the load, it's possible to increase stride frequency while reducing neuromuscular activity. So this could be a useful tool for, you know, return to play training, where the locomotor aspect of the training could be increased and overloaded above that normal training level, without increasing the risk of injury reoccurrence through increasing neuromuscular load. And then by moving the load more distally, so further down the leg towards the ankle, this will increase the neuromuscular load compared to that proximal loading, but does not have an effect on running technique. So it could be used to increase the intensity of that training session, but we know that it will not affect the technical aspect of that. So I don't know if you guys want to say anything about that.
Now, and again, going back, I'm just going to, JC, I know we've got a couple of your slides here, and I'm just going to remind you of them, and just so I'll whip through them and then I'll go back. But let me go back here. JC, now you're working on this. Let's talk about this data. First off, the one reason I'm excited is this is the very first data, and we've done a lot of work in this area, but people have been asking us about Emg data for a considerable amount of time. And this is one of the very first studies now where we've gone in and looked at load orientation or position in different activation of muscle. And we've been doing this practically for a dozen years. And, you know, I've worked with teams all over the world, and people and individual athletes say, well, you know, we've got a glute problem, we've got a quad problem, it's coming back after surgery. And we talk about loading the problem and getting the muscle directly targeted with the load or above and below its joint. But we've never, and we knew it was working because the outcome was positive, but we've never been able to quantify that. So I know from my end, this is the first time we're actually seeing the ability to manipulate specific muscle groups and muscle groups in specific activities through load profile. And that's, you know, we've never done this with resistance training of any form. You know, you can't do this with a dumbbell or that. I mean, you can to a degree, like in a gross manner, right? Let's change the exercise from a glute or a hip emphasis, and then you go to sort of like a sissy squat. Now you're on a quad emphasis. But we're getting it in sport specific movement here, and it's fascinating to me. And I'd like to hear what JC thinks. I mean, obviously, JC, you've been a part of this study.
Yeah, like I'm like you, Joe. Like we've talked about it for many years, trying to get some EMG data on the wearable resistance. So for Matt and PSG to get amongst it, we're really grateful. You know, it just sort of, again, you know, it comes back to me that mechanical load drives a lot of adaptation. And so by mechanical load, we have a load, we put a little bit of an additional load on the calf. That's an additional mechanical load. And so therefore we think there's going to be additional neural activation. But what was really cool is even that the load, slipping that load just down a little bit down, it might have been 20 centimeters, was it, Matt? Yeah, you know, going from proximal to distal, that's, you know, can be the same load, but by shifting it that 20 centimeters, which we'll talk about very shortly, suddenly the neural activation is just ramped up by that little sliding down the leg, which is, it's mechanically it makes sense, but now to actually saying that it's driving neural adaptation, and it'll drive metabolic adaptation, it'll drive hormonal adaptation, but it all starts with that little fusiform load that we put on the muscle, and how we actually shift it up and down will drive all that adaptation. But to have the numbers there now is cool.
Well, and that's why what people might not realize is this wasn't a cool design. This took almost 7 years to get this design right. And it ended up going back to anatomy where I was realizing we were failing in our design creation, but we created it with the belly and tail. So because we started to realize the most fascinating thing for me was this: where you put load is as or more important on the body in movement and sport specific activity than how much load. And that's been the most fascinating thing for me in this whole journey. And even the load and the whole product itself is designed to create a whole new experience of movement manipulation. So it's not just saying, hey, I want to get stronger, so I dump it on my thighs, you know, because you would think of 5 athletes, and you're running a series of drills with them, and they're all doing some sort of like acceleration over 10, 20 meters, but every one of them has a very different issue. And you try and individualize that, but it's difficult if your tools aren't individualizable. And this is something that the athletes figure out faster than the coaches do. We would go out and do trials, and I'd put a pair of shorts on a group of athletes. 3 of them would and I would suggest a loading pattern based on my experience. Let's say they were all sprinters. Within minutes, each athlete is moving that weight around to some very specific part of those shorts. And Matt, you would have seen this with the guys. And they're saying, no, I don't, it doesn't do anything for me there. I don't want it on my hips. For me, it's my glute and hams. Others will be on their adductors. But they're all doing the same drills. They're all doing the same exercises. But there's tiny manipulations. Like you said, JC, some will have it up nice and high at the hip because they want it, they need to feel speed. Others need to feel that strength component, and they'll have it down lower in the leg. And when we talk like speed dominant versus strength dominant athletes, we'll see their loading patterns are very different. In combat, we see it a lot. High speed combat athletes don't want heavy distal loading. But the guys that rely on knockout power and real strength, they have to get that distal loading because they're wired for that feeling. And so I think the exciting thing is not only do we have the ability to do that, but now we're seeing data that it does change things. So I have a question for both of you. Taking a look at that study, what would be the next step? Where would we go from here, continuing in the line of EMG?
Can I just ask Matt, maybe, Matt, with those findings that you've sort of elucidated now, can you see that that's sort of been used in your medic department or in some capacity or return to play that now that you've got some little bit of extra education about that neural side? Or, yeah, I'd like to know how you're applying that. Or
yeah, I mean, we're always trying to integrate it into the training, into the return to play training. But I think, yeah, definitely going to them with kind of more evidence to show, okay, this is increasing that training intensity. But the most important thing is without affecting them technically is kind of a big thing. Because if we can use this for return to play training and increase the training loads, even if it's 1 or 2% above what the team training is, we know that that player is going to A, have the confidence to return to normal training, and B, we know neuromuscularly that they are strong enough to return to that normal training and put up with the demands of the normal training. So if we can use LILA to give us that extra few percent in terms of training intensity, then we think it's going to be a really good tool for the return to play side of things. Yeah.
I think we're going to jump into return to play as one of our topics, in a minute here. But JC, just curious, looking at this research, and always this is study number 1 in EMG, right? What do you guys think is the next area? I'm just curious myself, because we haven't even talked about this yet. Where do we go with that data? We've got this great data. If I was in the audience, I'd be wondering, okay, that's kind of cool. It's really specific. What do we do with that? What would be next?
Like
there's
it just blows my mind. Like, it was 2014 we came together, Joe, and
wow,
it's 7 years, okay, and so and we haven't taken the cap off this really in terms of what is just keeps us honest every day is how people can use this, and the thousands of different loading patterns you can have with the wearable resistance. So you could actually take like a whole lot of hip dominant or thigh loaded, anterior, posterior, etc. And you could do exactly the same study that Matt's done with just a different piece. We could go, different pieces, different movements, different sports. It could go anywhere. We just need people that really want to understand that. As always, it's manpower and resources. And so it's nice to have this, basically seminal study in the EMG area, but it could go, it's frightening where it could go. It's not frightening, it's just so big where it could go, It's just, but we just need to have targeted, we need people to come along with targeted questions in their sport. I really want to understand how this piece of kit loaded in this manner affects this muscle group. And we could go anywhere with that.
Yeah. And because we've been doing this a long time, we're talking to people. I was online, Joseph Coyne, we talked about return to play. Joseph Coyne, a good friend of ours and a very well-respected S&C coach in the world. He was just there with the PI out of Shanghai, and he's doing his rehab on his Achilles. And I was walking him through protocols specifically on rebuilding his calf and activation of his calf on the injured side. And it was all about proximal and distal and anterior and posterior during certain activities. I mean, it was a study just in that one question. But I think for me, the one area that I see maybe the biggest value for a lot of people is in that return to play, because injury is such a terrible issue to deal with, right? It's S&C is great, but if you're injured, there's not even a conversation over there. And so, when we look at the kind of muscle imbalances and the deficits that occur in any injury situation, I think it's an exciting area. And I know, Matt, we're going to talk about that in a minute. So I'll leave it. But JC, I wanted to give you a chance to walk through the science. If we can get into these slides of yours that really help share a little more light on what Matt just explained.
Yeah.
Is that cool?
Yep.
So as I pull this up, tell me you guys can see it.
Yep.
Okay. So JC's job, when I met him 6-7 years ago, I said, JC, we need someone to put the science into this. And he has been doing that at a meteoric rate.
Relentlessly.
Yes. And you also say something else that I always love to bring up. You said, and you said this when we were speaking at the NSCA conference, you said, this is first principle physics and you just can't argue with it.
Yeah, I did, because I got at those sort of conferences, a lot of those guys just want to lift big, want to lift heavy. So it's trying to break a mindset. And believe me, you know, all of us know there is a place for lifting heavy. There's no argument here from us on that. It serves certain purposes, as does wearable resistance. And so that's what we wanted. The take-home message to your listeners is, hey, there's a place in the toolbox for this kit. And that's around sport-specific resistance training.
Yeah.
So this is the first one that Matt was talking about. You can see position 1, position 2, position 3. That's the same load. And, you know, the first principle of wearable resistance is around inertia. Inertia is resistance to change in motion. So if you make a limb heavier, it's harder to move. So that's the first principle. Just put weight on your limb and it's harder to move. Your muscles have to work harder to accelerate and decelerate. So that's the first principle. Second principle is where you put it. So we can see the same load, 200 grams at position 1, position 2, position 3. It has different rotational inertia properties. By slipping it by slipping it down the leg, that same load takes on very different inertial properties. And on the right, you can see the little table there. The one, if we actually load the thigh in position 2, where you see the load mid-femur, if you load it with 200 grams, what's that, Joe, 7 ounces or 14 ounces, 200 grams?
200 grams, 8 ounces. More
8 ounces, okay? So for our American friends, you can see 200 grams, 8 ounces. It's an increase. If you load it in the middle of the thigh, there's an increase in rotational inertia or an increase in effort needed to move it by 2%. But if you actually put it down in position 3, it's around about 6% harder to move it. So just simply, you know, that's about 20 centimeters down the thigh. It's an additional 4% to move it in terms of effort, okay? And you've got the stats for different loads there.
Just for reference, the other load's over there, but this is a 300 gram load. So that's a 12-ounce load. So 200 grams is a very small, slim load. We're not, and you know, it might be a couple of those that you put in as you've got there. Look what happens when you go to a 400 or 600 gram load going from proximal down to distal.
Yeah. Do we answer the questions now as they come or later, Joe?
I think we'll get through the slide and then we can have a look at the question for sure.
Yeah. Nice questions. Thanks, people, for engaging with us. We certainly can answer those questions at a later date. Yep.
But I would just do you want, yeah. So the basic. So on this slide, it's one of my favorite slides. Again, Matt, like you said, we now know we've got proof that moving product around the body changes activation of muscle groups during specific sport-specific movements like running for football. 2, we've quantified how a very small change in load position from sort of a hip to a knee, or just what we call proximal to distal load position, or anterior to posterior, really changes output. You know, you look at that, 1,000 grams is only 2 pounds. And if you had 2 pounds around your hip or 2 pounds at your knee, you have a 25% improvement in rotational workload. Imagine adding 25% more weight to the bar and the squat bar. You know, that's enormous.
Yeah. It just also for the listeners, it's also our way you periodize or progress and regress loads. We might have a load 1 close to the hip and they say, yeah, I'm not feeling it. I feel good. Next day, we actually progress it down to 2. Whoops. Yeah, that's actually, you know, I'm really feeling that. I've pulled up a little bit sore. I can regress it back to 1.5. It's
Yep.
the way we periodize and progress and regress loads.
And that's a good point, is that our progressions are based on load amounts. So adding more load to load position, going from proximal to distal, and then load complication or movement complication, starting to add rotations and whatnot that challenge actually movement. So yeah, it's not just about adding more weight. Now, I'll move you through, I'll get you.
Yeah, this is the one for any of you that are out there. You'll yeah, good. How is PSG using? We'll come back to the questions. Keep those questions coming, peeps. That's awesome.
Yeah, we're gonna have 10-15 minutes of Q&A directly with all these questions at the end.
Yep. If you understand this one, this is one of my favorite ones, because if you understand this, it's Newton's second law. But if you understand this, you understand why wearable resistance works. You can see the formula for force. Force equals mass times acceleration. So if you want to develop force capability or strength capability, this is the formula for it. And the way we do it with traditional strength training, as you can see in the picture, we put large masses, large loads on bars. And that's why the green is big. But because it's so large, it's hard to move these masses. In fact, it's impossible to move these masses quickly. So the velocity and the acceleration is small. So this is how traditional resistance strength training works. It actually is very mass centric, and it develops force capability by emphasizing the mass component. So if we go to the next slide, this is where the wearable resistance differs. It has a light load. You see the runner there, he has 600 grams on each calf. But because the load or the mass is so small, he can actually move it very, very quickly. So his velocities and his accelerations of his limbs are very, very quick. And that's why the A is larger than the M. So, there is most of us always think about force capability by lifting heavy loads. And that's why we've just got to say, hey, it's physics. If you move a light load very quickly, you will develop strength. You will develop force capability. It is physics, okay? So just flipping the mindset.
And just to clarify, that's Joseph Miller, Australia, New Zealand's fastest guy. So he moves pretty quick, that guy. He's a 10-1 runner. Yeah,
it was New Zealand's fastest runner. I talked about this a little bit earlier. Why it works is because it increases the inertia of your limbs. The inertia of your limbs is related to mass. You make an athlete heavier or you make a limb heavier, they become harder to move. They must perform more muscular work to accelerate and decelerate the limb. So that's why wearable resistance works. It just increases your inertia.
And I'm going to go ahead, because we've got a sort of a wrap-up slide on this, JC, but can just have a point on it. You've seen the other slide.
Yeah. This is a force velocity curve, and it's a concentric force velocity curve. But you see up here where the training emphasis, a lot of training emphasis is around that, where the forces are high, but the velocities are low. So down to that x-axis, high force means low velocity. And this is where, down the other end of the curve, where many of us believe there is a training need in high velocity force production. And it's not necessarily right, this curve, because it's saying you cannot produce high forces at high velocities, which we know is not the case with wearable resistance. The thing is, though, the training need is around high velocity force production for many, many athletes. Some athletes know, admittedly, a front lineman or a rugby scrummager, those sort of guys, big athletes, sumo wrestlers, yeah, they need to be down at that high force end.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah.
Now, okay, so for just to move us along, just in a couple of areas in football, another area that we've done research on was on the warm-up study out of Argentina. And JC, just a quick minute or two on this if we can. I think this one's a lot of people already familiar with, but walk us through, because this was similar to some of the stuff that Matt was doing. And you said, Matt, you guys have started and you're working into your warm-up protocol, right? And for what people to understand, that means if you have a practice session and you've got your 10, 20, 30 minutes of warm-up time, which is some version of general and specific conditioning, S&C, movement, ball drills, you know, the whole thing. If you just put EXOGEN in there, you know, load up your calf sleeve, put your X amount of grams on there, wear it for 20, 30 minutes, 3, 4, 5 times a week, whatever it is. We're seeing tremendous improvements in performance on field and change already. And that doesn't create another need for EXOGEN training. It's literally just building into what they're currently doing. And this study we did out of Argentina, which JC, we've published, and this is with the under 17 national champions of Argentina. I would say all, if not a majority of these players are contracted somewhere already. You know, there'd be a high level group of young athletes. Talk us through what we found in that.
Yeah, like the first thing, and I think one of the things that we originally talked with Martin Boucher and Paris Saint-Germain is that soccer players, especially Paris Saint-Germain, may be playing 2 or 3 games a week, congested schedules, and we're talking about this a little bit later, but we need smart training options to actually maintain strength, power, speed, change of direction, aerobic fitness. And so some of our thinking at the time was, well, how can we actually touch base with this? How can we actually, they're not going to get in the gym. How can we actually work these within a training session? That's the beauty about wearable resistance. You use it as part of what you do, as Joe just said. So we decided, let's try and integrate it into warm up. And Annabelle and Gustavo over in Argentina kindly helped us out. Well, they didn't kindly help us out. They just took it by the neck and went with it. And these guys trained three times a week, just did a warm up, around about a 20-minute warm up that, you know, started with a typical ramp type of protocol. And then they just got a little bit faster moving, and they did some sprint drills, which you'll see very, very shortly. And then they did some ball work for around about 20 minutes. And they did that 3 times a week. They progressed. They did the calf loading. You can see some guys with calf loading, the calf sleeves on, some not. And they progressed loading from 200 to 600 grams on their calves over the course of 8 weeks. After 8 weeks, we found that the wearable resistance group got significantly faster and than the control group. Also, their standing long jump was better, and their repeated sprint ability was better than the control group or the unloaded group. The vertical jumps, because we didn't do too many vertical jumps, were pretty much the same in both the control and the loaded group. So fantastic study.
JC, something on that too that's really important to point out. This is the national under 17 champions at Belgrano. This was done in season. And that's exactly what we were talking about, Matt, about looking for solutions in season, that we didn't just improve squat strength or leg strength. We improved on-field speed performance in season with a warm-up protocol. And I mean, you know, it's fantastic to see that. Now, and JC, I think the question everybody be having, you got to clarify, what happened to their S&C? Were they all still doing S&C? What was going on? Was this in concurrent with their traditional S&C, the EXOGEN versus non-EXOGEN group? I can't remember.
No, my understanding, Joe, these guys were training 4 to 5 times a week on pitch, you know, four times a week at least on pitch. So there was very little traditional S&C. There was principally on the field. So, you know, it was a way that we could get some strength training into these guys. So, I could be a little bit wrong, but that was my understanding.
Yeah, I think so too. And we'll get Matt in a minute to talk about this congested schedule. Just a quick clip for people to see. So like JC said, half these guys got load on the black socks, half them don't. And they're going through very high level, normal football warm-up drills, you know? And they're just loaded in there. They've got their X amount of grams on the calf sleeves or wherever they are. They go through those drills. It's pretty straightforward stuff. Doesn't interfere with their movements.
The other thing that Matt said at the beginning, the beautiful thing about the calf sleeves, it works the muscles across the knee and across the hip. Yeah. Okay, so like it's a 2-for-1.
Let's just see, I think and then again, like you said, Matt, you know, these footballers, they love their ball, right? And they're so sensitive to it. And having kit that they can use with a ball or high-speed movement. Oh, I thought the ball would pop out there. I think that's on the next clip. And like everybody in a warm-up, they move from general to specific type activities.
One of the nice things to know here as well is as John said earlier, the intensity of the warm-up is what really makes a difference. You know, as those speeds are increasing, as the rotation of the legs is increasing, that is what's going to give those players the adaptations that we're seeing in that study. Yeah,
you're right. They're able to maintain that intensity because the product's not limiting, right? They're not worried about, they don't have a fear about an injury or instability, or the product's not pulling them in the wrong directions. Like you said, they put it on, they don't think about it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, the next part and what we're going to wrap up with before we get into this QA is just a couple of minutes on looking at some new areas, right? The first area we talked about is return to play. Now, this is a massive area of extreme interest to anybody who works with a high-level club or certainly a professional organization. Just, Matt, some of your thoughts on this, what some of the things Matt, PSG is looking at in this area coming up. And then JC, for you, obviously, you've just completed another bunch of research in this area with netball players there with the Plantiga system as well. So I'll leave you guys to this one.
Okay, so yeah, the ultimate aim of return to play is to prepare the player for the demands of training and games, but moreover to give the player the confidence to know that they can withstand these demands without having a reoccurrence of injury. And so one of the things that we wanted to do is we wanted to use LILA to effectively increase the kind of end of return to play protocol training intensity above and beyond what would normally be expected of a normal training session. So this then gives the player that confidence that they can go back into normal training, and the likelihood of them getting injured is very, very low. And we did this kind of, if it was like a fairly long injury, in the last 4 weeks of the return to play, where we started again with a light load of 1% body mass located on the posterior calf, proximally, so close to the knee again. And then as these weeks progressed, we moved the load down to medially and then distally, so similar to that 1, 2, 3 photo that you showed us before. Yeah, and then finally we would increase the load from 1% body mass to 2% body mass in the last couple of weeks of this return to play. And so this technique enabled us to gradually overload the training intensity and the training load, but while minimizing that risk of injury reoccurrence as well. So, quick question for you. Did you find that with just a general injury? You find, I mean, this is something we're hoping to do some study with. We haven't signed up or recorded data on this yet, have we? We haven't got. We've got some GPS data and things, but because it's only kind of a few, obviously you only have a few players that are injured, we haven't looked too deeply into this yet. No. Well, maybe JC, perfect. Now, of course, you're like I said, it's what John said is you're using two things there in your progression or your periodization. You're using load position as a periodized acute variable, right? Moving it down proximally, and it works. They feel that very quickly, especially after an injury, because a distal load on an injured area is very different than on an able body, right? And then the other one was you used higher load only after you'd moved load position, which I think is a lot of people are sort of following that similar protocol. So increasing load is a secondary choice in periodization with resistance as compared to load position. That correct? Yeah, I think well, from kind of the infographic you showed before with the percentage differences of as you move the load, moving the load is a greater increase than adding more load. You know, if you're adding 1% of body mass, then that's a 1% increase in training, in the load for that training. But if you're moving it down, it's increasing it by 2 or 3% or even more, then instantly it's harder for the players. So we found it's more beneficial to move the load first, and then when they get used to kind of having the load at the extremities of the limbs, then to increase the load itself.
Yeah, we've seen that with other programs. JC, now you've actually got data on this.
Yeah, like, I guess one of the research areas, we pretty much understand wearable resistance as a performance tool for running and for some sports. Like, people out there is just a lot of options in other sports that we just need to understand better. Believe me, it's so easy to be original here and to ask original questions. We haven't even talked about wearable resistance as a coaching tool, but where we're dedicating some of our emphasis now is in around this return to play. And that's because we're getting feedback from users. And we've got one gentleman, Barry Jennings, who's working with elite netballers, which is a game like basketball, but it doesn't bounce the ball, but it's a female sport. And he's had an athlete that he's been putting foot pods on, which are inertial sensors in your inner soles. So he's got a beautiful movement diagnostic tool, and we've got a beautiful movement solution tool. And he's had an athlete that's had a navicular stress fracture for 6 months now. And she started off with an asymmetry at 18%, and they've tried everything. And what they've done so far is get it down, that asymmetry down to 11%. One training session, he decided, well, I'm going to do some unloaded runs, and asymmetry was still around 12 to 14%. They put wearable resistance on the injured leg. It was only 400 grams. And basically the asymmetry shot up to 18% and then reduced. And they do these court drills, 3 lots of court drills for about 5 minutes. And it reduced over time. The asymmetry reduced to around about 8%. And the interesting thing, okay, well, the brain is sort of making adjustments and getting activating, and, you know, but the interesting thing is then he withdrew the resistance off, and then the actual asymmetry kept on reducing down to 6%. And so, like, it's not just a one-off. We've had this report, and we've seen it in many athletes, and we've even seen that in our runner that didn't have, he had asymmetries in those isokinetic tests. And over time, the asymmetries in the isokinetic tests reduced. It's just a great tool for reducing asymmetries. And we need motor skill act guys or neuroscientists to help us try and understand why this is happening, especially when you load it off, take the load off, and it keeps on reducing the asymmetry for, you know, quite a period of time afterwards. So
we saw that, you know, when we did that program with Haryana, you know, she was at 30%. We've reduced her down from 29, 30% to 2-3% in about 6 weeks to return to win that silver medal in Rio. But Matt, I just want to add one more thing. I ask you one more thing, and you kind of, for me, the return to play stage, the injury is one thing, but that confidence is terrible. And you talked about it. You said for the players to have the confidence to rebuild it. And even you went as specific that PSG is looking at even in latter stage return to play. Sure, early stage rebalance, unilateral deficit. I think it's pretty straightforward, as you mentioned, JC. But how about that confidence side? You know, having that load in those unstable conditions that helps to just rebuild overall confidence on the field. I just really want you to, if you can, share a bit, because you use that word, and you and I know the physical return to play is one thing, but the mental one is sometimes it never really goes away. And football, it's a high-speed contact sport, no matter how you look at it.
Yeah, so as you say, that to get the physical aspect of it is one, to get them back to kind of the level where they can train and play again. But the psychology part of it is something else. And I think what we found was that when the players had these loads, and then when we explained to them, okay, the session you've done is as difficult as any session that you're going to do with the team, but you've done it loaded, you've done it with the exoskeleton. That gives them that confidence that we're talking about, that they know they can put up with the demands of the training and of the games. So as well as the physical development side of things, it gives that added bonus of getting them back to training mentally as well.
That's that Ironman feeling, right? They feel stronger than they were before, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's so important. And a quick question, did you use GPS to sort of, like you said, we put them through sessions that we know were as hard as normal training, but we added EXOGEN. So it wasn't that you weren't playing with them. They could actually see. You just did a first team high performance session and you had weight on your body. You're ready to go back.
Yeah, absolutely. We use live monitoring and things like that, so we can show them in real time. You've covered the high speed and sprint distances that you would normally in a game, but you've done that with 2% of body mass on your calves. So when they realize that and it clicks for them, okay, I'm ready to go back now. And
you would feel that they because we didn't talk about this before, but I'm curious, you know, they would have that positive response.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. For them, they want to go back into training. They don't want to be the person who, you know, is last in training because they're not fully prepared. So for them to be able to go back in and compete again on the level that they were before, and for us to get them above their baseline level pre-injury is a massive thing for them.
Yeah. And now, you know, at a PSG level, you take a look at a marquee player. And I know we've been approached by many of the best programs in the world when marquee players are hurt. And that's usually where a lot of people come to us. That changes everything in the club, and having tools that help not just rebuild confidence, but actual physical abilities. And again, it's one tool, as you said, JC, in the toolbox, but I think it really is one of the best tools at that important part of that recovery, you know, getting them back there confident. Because you know what it's like, you've got a Neymar, whoever they are, everybody's waiting for that person to come back on that field. And how many times do you hear the pundits and everybody talk about saying, oh, it doesn't look like he's really ready to be back, it didn't really perform, da-da-da-da-da. Those, you know, there's a tremendous pressure there, but if we can build that confidence, it's certainly going to help that level of intensity that they want to put out on the field. Now, if anybody who's in a pro program will know exactly what we talk about. Last two questions, I just want to ask you guys just to talk a little bit about this because they're exciting areas, cutting edge as it gets. Matt, you mentioned the challenges of the congested game schedule. And this is that whole idea of how much traditional resistance training do we need now? We need some, you know, we know it's a great tool for the right player at the right time, but when you're playing 180 plus games a season, you know, what do you do? How do you find in-season on-field solutions for strength? Your thoughts there at PSG with EXOGEN?
Yeah, so one of the areas that I would really like to kind of explore a little and perform some research studies is looking at how we can use LILA to help with these congested schedules. So as you say, guys can be playing 2 or 3 games a week, and then on top of their normal season games, now we have pre-season tours where they'll travel around the world. They'll have international games, so they could be playing upwards of 80 games a season, maybe more sometimes if they're playing all of the domestic games as well. And one of the problems with this is that if you're playing 3 games a week, then your focus in training is going to be recovery, and then to ask a player then to do resistance training as well, it's going to be very, very difficult. So it's possible that LILA could be used to potentially reduce the training time by increasing the intensity of shorter training sessions. So instantly you're reducing that accumulative fatigue of longer training. And then if you're also able to give them some sort of neuromuscular increase in load, as well as reducing the training time, then potentially it can be a really good tool to maintain a player's strength, maintain a player's fitness throughout a season when you have got 2 or 3 games a week.
Well, like Martin told me, he said footballers are different than rugby guys. They don't like to train sore, right? You can't have a heavy weight session on a Sunday and then everybody shows up sore and they're still willing to smash each other. You know, there's a finesse in the way they move, and there's a delicacy on the foot that needs to be maintained. And you're right, it's not easy. You know, where do you find time? And I think some of the stuff, even the Argentina study, and this is what Martin first approached us, was looking at EXOGEN in sort of short-sided or small-sided game situations, you know, 15, 20 minutes, higher intensity, hip loading in the legs to maintain and build strength into that component so that we didn't have to supplement with traditional resistance as much or as a travel option as well. And have we done anything in that area with PSG yet, or this is sort of next stage?
So this was a study that I'm currently carrying out now. We've finished all the on-field testing. So we used our reserve team here, and we had half the guys wore LILA. They wore 200 grams on the distal posterior calf, compared to a control group who didn't wear anything. And effectively what we wanted to do is we used GPS heart rate monitors to look at the difference between the groups of whole training sessions, all of the possession drills and all of the small-sided games. And what we did is we categorized these possession and small-sided games depending on the player density. So we know that playing in small areas in football is going to overload those acceleration, deceleration metrics.
Right.
Whereas playing on a bigger area, you're going to get more high-speed running, more sprinting. So we wanted to have a look if LILA had an effect on any specific metric of these, while obviously increasing that neuromuscular load. And we haven't done complete the data analysis yet, but I've had kind of a look at the raw data, and effectively what I can see is that while we're increasing that training intensity and that training load, there is no effect to the on-field training. So by that I mean there is no effect between the two groups of accelerations, decelerations, high speed running and sprints. So yeah, what we can say from that is that while it is increasing the neuromuscular load, it's not having an effect on the technical aspects of the training. It's not having an effect on players' performance on the field.
Right.
Which is an incredibly
specific football measures, right? This is GP. This is all your PA data.
Yeah, this is all the GPS data from those possession and small-sided game drills.
Well, we'll look forward to that. I think we got a topic for another webinar coming up soon. But here, just the last question before we go in, and this is just such a unique area, and people might not think about this, but again, as cutting edge as it gets, and I think listeners would appreciate it. So you brought up in our last chat with JC, and I think before we even got on the webinar, you talked about this other area, substitute player load compensation, which is actually a really big issue for big clubs.
Yeah, so when you've got a squad of 25 players and you've got 11 guys playing a game, and even though out of those 11, not all of them play the full game. One of the hard things is to maintain a player's fitness and game readiness throughout the entire season. If we know that most games they'll probably be sitting at the side and maybe playing 10 or 20 minutes. So one of the ways that we thought this may be possible is to use LILA for those compensation and supplementation training sessions. So they normally carry them out directly after the game with one of the performance guys, where they'll carry out high speed running and sprint distances to get them up to a similar level to what the starters did in that game. And yeah, it'll either be carried out after the game, but the problem with this is that you've only got a really small time window before those players have to get ready to get back on the team bus to go home. And it's the same if you were to carry it out in the next day of training. Normally the technical staff are going to be like, okay, you've got 20 minutes, but we need these guys to come back and train with the team to do the normal training session that we had planned anyway. So potentially there's a scope there for LILA to increase again that training intensity and minimize the time needed to do this compensation training to make sure that these players are going to be game ready all season. And
it's funny, and it comes down to that simple, which the whole kit was designed to do, was to get on people when they're doing their activity in sport and in an environment that happens. So like you said, because even if you say we're going to do their load compensation the next day, well, they've missed a 24-hour window, right? Because all the guys who played in the game had it 24 hours ago. So yeah, you could put that 20-minute window, but that's going to affect their recovery because then they've got another session. And having that ability to do some of that extra training with a higher intensity, I can imagine it would be really valuable for a program like that, because like you said, you're rotating players, you're traveling. Interestingly enough, another area we had in sort of warm-up was substitute players coming into a game. I know one area we talked about with Nick at the All Blacks was you know, that impact players coming in at a second half, and often substitute players are pre-planned. You know, they know where in the game they're going to be coming in. Generally, it's not always just a reaction to somebody being hurt or whatnot, and making sure players are really at game readiness and using EXOGEN. And I think GPS data from any high-level team has seen sometimes when a player comes on the field and they're not really ready for play, it has a major effect on the outcome of that game. And I know we've talked with other pro teams about having EXOGEN go into the warm-up protocol for potentiation during an actual field game. But I think that's another area we can talk about. Guys, we're just, like I said, this was going to be a 75 to 90-minute session. We've got about 10 minutes to jump into Q&A. Why don't we do that right now? And we'll just start at the top here. Does that make sense? I'll read the question and I'll throw it to you guys. Question: has there been any research with younger athletes specifically focusing on biomechanical form and correction or optimization? Yeah, there's a lot in that area, but well, Matt, maybe you can start with that, and I'll tell you why. Because you're working with the academy, and the academy is younger athletes. You know, just for people to know, a lot of your work is specifically with those development athletes.
Yeah, so all of the work we do here is with the academy teams. In terms of kind of focusing on the biomechanical side of things, we haven't done kind of set studies looking at this yet, but that would be really interesting for things like you were saying before, you know, with the asymmetrical loading for corrections and things that we could use in the return to play. It'd be really interesting to get a player kind of using EMG for that, or performing some exercise on like force platforms and things to get that data and see exactly what LILA is doing when you're using asymmetrical loading, or the training increase when you're doing specific football drills to prepare them for training. So there hasn't been any kind of specific research from us yet. I don't know if there's some from you guys, but it's definitely an area that I would love to look into. Yeah.
And this now goes to the question the point you brought up earlier. And just for folks to know, we didn't cover it a lot today, but it's a massive area of EXOGEN's value. And I spend half my time consulting programs specifically on technical skill improvement with EXOGEN. So not S&C, not power, not speed, not acceleration, not conditioning, but you know, it could be on running form, on technical form, on stroke mechanics, on golf mechanics. And we do a lot in that. And so that first question, and JC, I'm not sure, quickly, just to answer that and wrap that, has there been specific research with younger athletes on biomechanical form correction, optimization, basically skill and coaching technique? Have we done anything directly in that?
No,
not so much, right?
Like, as I said, you know, performance we've nailed. We're starting to get into the RTP side of things, but the coaching, skill acquisition, it's a real area that's pretty exciting, but we haven't touched it really.
Yeah, and just so you know, I consult with programs all over the world on that. So whoever asked that question one, please reach out. I'm going to put my email up and I can share exactly what we do from the coaching side. Like I said, right now, we just finished a big project prior to the Olympic trials with Dennis Mitchell and his group out of Florida, which had Shakari and Richardson, and it was all technical work. We weren't working on power or speed. It was in-air running mechanics, individual for each athlete. And we can talk a little bit about how we did that. But the research data we need. Number two, how does it have a positive effect on a batsman in the perspective of modern cricket? I'm just going to suggest whoever asked that question, please go follow Stephen Jones. Okay, Stephen Jones is one of the leading minds and fast bowling and cricket coaches in the world. He is one of our master coaches in cricket. He has a very incredibly detailed IG page. So just Stephen Jones, follow him, and you can certainly reach out to him and get a little more specificity on that question in cricket, where we're doing a lot of work. We are doing work though, John, with the, who is it, Houston Astros, LA Dodgers. There is some bat work being done in Major League Baseball right now as well, correct?
Yeah, not bat work, pitching work, but it's the same premise, you know, like a weighted bat, you know, well, no, that's overloading the whole system. The wearable resistance, we can put a lower arm sleeve on, we can put an upper arm sleeve on, we can, you know, depending where the problem is, we can overload those muscle groups very specifically to actually improve performance. It could be rotational and we load the core, you know, so it's identifying what muscle groups that need the work and we can load accordingly.
And what's really important there for you ask that question to anybody is, and it's individually specific. So if you're a batsman coach and that's what you're working on, you've got 4 players you're working with, trust me, every single one has a little bit different issue. And so some it might be that core engagement, could be the force mechanics coming through rotation, could be just elbow position and little tweaks that you're trying to improve somebody whose technique is really good. And so the tool becomes that tweaking tool. And we do a lot of it like privately with professional programs, but do reach out and we can talk a little more. Like I said, follow Stefan. He's doing, there's not a 2-3 day period it doesn't go by that he's not talking about some tweak in technical aspects of certainly bowling with cricket. 3, very, very straightforward. How is PSG using wearable resistance to improve player performance? I think we talked about that for the whole webinar.
Yeah, so just to quickly answer it, we use it, one of the core ways that we see it as a useful tool is to use it in possession and small-sided game drills. Because we know by manipulating the size and the rules and the conditions of these types of drills that we can get specific physical outcomes of these. So if we can add LILA to give us that extra 1 to 5% of increase in training load, then that is only going to benefit the players on the field when they're playing other teams who don't necessarily use LILA or don't do resistance training.
Okay. And the other area you said you're looking at exploring is the RTP area, obviously. Return to play. Question 4 is wearable resistant loads used during the entire training sessions on specific training days or for part of the session only with PSG?
So this again, it varies week to week, depending on what the focuses of the sessions are. What we tend to do is we use it on day +3, which is kind of our strength day, or day +4, which is our speed focus day. And yeah, we'll use it either, it depends on kind of how many games the players have that week or the previous training load, but we'll either use it for full training sessions, or again, we'll focus on specific aspects of that training session. So we might use it again for the small sided games and then take it off, or we might use it for sprint drills and then take it off and the players will carry on as normal.
And I'm just putting that note up there, 7 EXOGEN protocols video. We actually just released this on YouTube and we might have time to show it really quick, but basically there's 7 protocols where you could use EXOGEN. 1 is in a warm-up, 1 is in the technical skill, 3 is gameplay, and that's kind of your small-sided games, sparring, 5v5, whatever it might be. The RTP protocol, a standard S&C protocol as a weight tool, and then potentiation and compression or recovery. But check out that 7 protocol video. The follow-up email to anybody who subscribed, that video will be in there, so don't worry. And also, just for anybody listening, the slides you saw today will be sent to you as part of your follow-up video. So you get a copy of everything you see here, so you don't have to worry if you've missed a bit of the information. Thanks, Matt. Next question. 5, when you use wearable resistance, how would a sports scientist account for it in GPS data? Would it lower the threshold for what would be considered as HMLD?
Okay, yeah, so one of the ways that we looked at it was looking at certain metrics within the GPS that can show us neuromuscular fatigue. So Martin Bouchet, he's done a lot of research on this, looking at the box-to-box runs. So you basically do a run between the 2 boxes on the field, and you're doing it at a specific speed. And from this, you can look at different metrics. So we have something called the force velocity load. So it's basically looking at the amount of force needed for the speed that you're going at. And if the more fatigued you are, the more force is required for you to maintain that speed. So what we did when we were doing the study is we did these box-to-box runs before and after training. And then we looked at the difference between the group that had the exoskeleton and the group that we used as a control. And I don't have the data for this yet because I need to do the data analysis, but yeah, we'll be able to see if there is an increase in neuromuscular fatigue from using LILA. And in terms of the actual things like high metabolic load distance, so we don't have that specifically, but we have kind of equivalents of it. And we found effectively there was no difference between any of those kind of metrics between the two groups, which again was nice because it meant that you can carry out training at a higher load, but it's not affecting on-field performance.
Yeah, and we saw that, we've seen this before with some of the hockey programs I worked with for Olympic and World Cup qualification, is it didn't lower thresholds, it actually increased output, you know. So people were always, like you said, does it somehow affect what was going on the field? No. And I think what people got to remember is we're not overloading the body. We're putting just the right amount of load so that they can stay within that threshold. And one little guideline we put is never reduce speed or output by more than 5 to 10%. If you're seeing that happen, then you have too much load. So if you're punching, you're kicking, you're throwing, you're running, and speed or output is reduced a lot, now you've turned it into a heavy resistance tool. And that's not what EXOGEN's real value is, correct, Matt? Is, you know, movement quality and staying within your thresholds is almost one of your periodization markers, right? Because don't throw a whole bunch of load on there and just turn it into a heavy movement. That's not where you get its benefit.
Yeah, I think that the key for using wearable resistance is that it should not affect the athlete technically.
Yeah.
You know, if it does by those very, very small kind of thresholds, because it's not designed to massively increase the load. It's designed to increase the load slightly, but high velocities, and that's where you see the difference.
High velocities and high endurance, like you might have it for 20 minutes. You're not doing three sets of 10 with EXOGEN. You're putting it on for a 20-minute, you know, short, small-sided game session. And so that 200 grams is there the entire time. Mm-hmm. You know, there's not that, and that's what people forget is just think what a heavy shoe does to you when you go for a run. You don't notice it when you put it on your foot, and then you're 5-10 minutes in, the load is there. Okay, and those are little guidelines that are in our general user guide and our app, which is going to be launched in Q3. All this information on training data is in the app. JC mentioned inertia with wearable resistance. Have you looked at any change in antagonist muscle activation, possibly to compensate for the increased inertia? Cool.
Yeah, just quickly on this one, we haven't. Matt's the only one that's looked at some activation for us, but just, you know, I would hypothesize because the limb is heavier and therefore to break it, you know, to decelerate the limb, there'd be higher antagonist activation. And I think Matt's results would support that to some effect. But yeah, we haven't done a lot of work in that area.
No, but practically I have. And what we do is we use that for deceleration mechanics and body loading, where people that have that drift or shift where their center of mass starts to move outside their base of support. And so we actually use light loading, again, not too much, because if they move right outside their base of support, like a weighted vest would be, it actually changed their movement mechanics. It won't give them the real strategy that they use during change of direction. We haven't studied it, but we've used it a lot in that area. And you can see it happening. You can qualitatively see it on video and whatnot. Okay, 7. Can use EXOGEN, wearable resistance, LILA wearables to maximize post-activation potentiation. I'll just quickly answer this. Yes. One of our 7 protocols is called potentiation protocol. We've just had a bunch of the USA track and field athletes at Eugene, Oregon down there. Some of them that are going for gold in Tokyo have their EXOGEN kit prior to the race, have it on. They potentiate with it just like you'd have that baseball donut. We have quite a few athletes using that, like a resistance tool, except highly specific. So before a game, before a competition, Matt, I'm not sure if you guys have used it at all in that area.
We haven't. Well, we probably have, but haven't really, you know, measured it or anything like that. But yeah, I think it's definitely something that it can be used for this year, and you'll definitely see potentiation from using that pre-competition.
Our first study was done in that area with combat sports and punching and kicking, and we found quite a bit of change in that activation with a warm-up with EXOGEN versus a traditional warm-up without. But something else, get on that email list, because we're going to be sending out our research booklet. Now that's everything JC's done in the last 7 years, including this work with Matt. It's updated every 3 months. And if you're on our mailing list, you'll get that for free. All those published studies and updates, or the abstracts from them as well. Next question.
Can I just add a comment to that one, Joe?
Yeah, okay, no problem, JC.
The post-activation potentiation suggests that there's some neural potentiation, but just be aware that wearing wearable resistance has a thermogenic effect too. It warms up the muscles and the tissues better. And one of the injured athletes that we're working with, one of the injured elite netballers, she loves warming up with the wearable resistance because she just feels it warms it up quicker and warms it up better than just not loaded with wearable resistance. So be aware of that also.
Yeah.
I like the word acute enhancement because post-activation potentiation suggests neural side of things, but I think there could be a host of things that come in there to actually enhance performance.
Right, and we've got athletes that pick that up right away. They take it and use that for themselves immediately. Another question here, last couple of questions. Do the players use the kit privately or only under coach supervision? Matt, what are you guys doing?
At the moment, only under our supervision. I think one of the reasons for that is because obviously we want to control their training load.
Yeah.
You know, for us to minimize injury risks, it's better for us to know their entire training load, so that we're not making them do things in training that they're potentially too fatigued for. You know, if we allow them to take this kit and use it privately, we can't regulate that. Sure. So it's the same with anything like that. You know, you wouldn't allow, or you wouldn't recommend your players to go and do loads of strength training under a barbell privately, because again, you can't regulate that and you can't be there to protect them and control that training load.
Yeah. Now, one thing on that, just so you know, and it kind of relates to Jason's question there at the end, we're talking a lot about elite sport, professional, and obviously we've got Matt here from one of the biggest professional sports programs on the planet. But just so people know, 50 to 60% of our customers are the weekend warrior. They're the average person that's using the product for improving their 10K, improving their golf game, improving their swim, or parents buying it for kids that are, you know, in those development stages, you know, need to get a little more strength in their soccer game or whatever it might be. So it's not just an elite tool. This webinar just happens to be about that, but it's still just weight training, and you can certainly use that. And Jason, we have many examples of the recreational athlete and club level teams that people put a lot of time and emphasis on using EXOGEN as any elite athlete would. So there's no limitations for that. And so it also relates to that using privately or professionally. Most people buy the product, they get our education. Next, like I said, this next quarter, they'll be jumping into the app, but they take our user guide, they take it home. We do a lot of work online to help them understand it, and they get it into their sport. And the nice thing is it works every time because it's weight training. But just remember that it's just weight training, but a very specific form. So the last question, question number 9, putting it on an athlete with a bad technique, does it make the technique worse? His example was running, but JC, what do you want to take a shot at that?
Yeah, one of the things that I really love about this tool is, yes, we can put it on a limb that has bad technique, and we can actually purposely exaggerate the bad technique. It's mindful exaggeration of bad technique, so the athlete becomes mindful of it and does something to correct it. Conversely, we can actually load to try and correct the technique. Both those loading patterns operate on implicit learning, where the athlete is trying to correct the technique themselves, rather than explicit learning where the coach is trying to correct them. So it's a very powerful, you know, technique correction tool. So we can exaggerate it if we want to, but we just got to be mindful why we're doing it. Okay.
Okay, one more thing. That's something I call assistive versus resistive loading. Just to clarify that, we have a video on that as well, assistive versus resistive loading. So if somebody needs to become aware of what they need to do to improve, We'll teach you where to put the load. That's an assistive load. But ultimately, you need a resistive load in the position that the muscle needs to work against. And it's another really unique feature of EXOGEN. And so don't be, now here's the other thing. People are scared. They ask that question, oh, but I don't know where to put it. The general guidelines that we already have online with your product will take you through that. It's an intuitive tool. And the one thing we've learned, and Matt, you talked about the easiness of it. The first thing you think is, I'm not sure where to put it. But when you get a pair of cat sleeves and you go for a run down the field and you move the weight around, you go for a run again and you move the weight around, right now, you immediately know where you want that load. And you know, oh, that makes my technique weird. Oh, but that makes it really good. And it becomes so intuitive. So it doesn't become this really scary journey once you get it on and follow the simple guidelines we give, correct?
Yeah, I think the most important thing about this, especially if you're using this as an individual, you know, if you're using this to go out running at the weekend, or if you're using this for a team, is to understand the LILA as best as possible yourself. So go out, experiment with it, try it on different areas of the body, see how that is affecting your technique, your performance, the kind of the neuromuscular effect of that. And then go away and learn from that, and what you'll find is that everybody is different as well. Yeah. So somebody might load slightly differently to somebody else, but they'll get the same output from that because maybe their running technique is slightly different. So it's one of those things that it's because it's so customizable and because everybody's different, then we can't sit here and say one size fits all or one placement is perfect for everything. That needs to come from the athlete, that needs to come from the individual for them to really understand the product and understand how it can improve their performance.
And we give very good guidelines through our video and our online education when you get the product, and our links to that and on YouTube. And more is coming out every week. And like I said, the app is just in beta test right now, which has all the education on it. So you don't have to have a fear about the wrong technique because it's so easily adaptable. Just as a simple thought, you have a weight here and you go for a run, you think, wow, it feels funny. The first thing we say is readjust the weight. We show you where that is. And that's why, like any new tech, like your iPhone, whatever it is, that first week you play with it a bit. And within that time, then you'll see our 6-week running program, our 6-week golf program, or a speed program for one of your kids or yourself or whoever it might be. And then all of a sudden, now you understand the program and why we give you the load in that position. So the first thing to do, put it on your body, and our Get Started guide really walks through that. Like you said, Matt, move the load around. You have the ability, you're not going to hurt yourself just moving the load around and going for a run or kicking the ball or having a golf swing. Just don't take all the load out of your kit and put on your body day one, and nobody would suggest that. So just like I said, have a little fun and explore with it like you would with any new tech, and you'll quickly find like, oh wow, I get that. That feels really good, or that's making my club face open, or whatever you're working on. So trust our guidelines on that. And again, because you're starting light, there's a safety margin for that. And just so people know, the only mistake we see that you need to be aware of is don't overload. 100, 200, one or two of these on your body is a starting load. That's all you need. And you won't notice it at the beginning, but you will notice it at the end. Correct, Matt?
Yeah, absolutely. Start light and build up from there, because it's the fact that you're carrying this out for a long period of time, or you're carrying it out at high speed, is what's going to make the difference. So yeah, it might feel very light to start with, but you need to think at the end, you're going to feel that like it's a lot heavier than it is.
Yeah. And the last question, in the New Zealand research, do the teams continue to use EXOGEN at the moment as they prepare for the Olympics? I don't know who in the that was the 2016 Rio Games, the one I was talking about with the Women's Sevens program. I don't know. We've got many Olympic programs around the world right now in final preparation with EXOGEN, but I'm not sure in New Zealand. Is there anybody specifically in New Zealand?
Like who's using it, I wouldn't have a clue. I only understand who's using it for research purposes. So that's what I keep an eye on, Joe. So
I can tell you this. We think the fastest person in the world is going to be, is currently on EXOGEN, and will prove it at the 100-meter final for the men's and women's Tokyo, and you'll just have to wait till the games are done and we can all cheer for that. But we can't mention all the names right now. We're kind of excited about it though. But okay, you guys, just to wrap up, there's a couple of things I want to say as we finish things up. First, most important, Matt, thanks for making the time to join us again today. I think a lot of people are excited to see, and I wanted to say this, one of the reasons we went to PSG was because you guys are cutting edge. You don't just try and get new tech. You have a whole performance department that's not only trying to bring in tech for PSG, but to drive tech in football, to be an industry leader in football. And what's wonderful is you're here with PSG sharing information that anybody in other clubs or anybody else could use. And, you know, leaders share information because of that security. And I think that speaks loads to the great job that Martin has done to get that program off the ground and for the performance department to be part of it. So we're really appreciative of you and PSG for allowing you to be here and continuing to work with us. And it looks like some great more research is going to be coming out that we're going to share shortly. And I think people can look for you on LinkedIn or other forums to reach out and talk directly with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can share things like that with you guys, and maybe you can put it on your Instagram or Facebook. So if anyone wants to contact me, they're more than welcome to. Sure.
And of course, JC, it's always a pleasure with you, our master guru, who is the leader of this science and is putting the science into wearable resistance around the world. Always a pleasure, JC, and people can reach out to you directly at AU2 Sprints if they've got thoughts or ideas as a result of what we talked about today.
100%.
And just as I mentioned, the slides that we showed, we're happy to share. Those will be in a follow-up email to anybody who registered will come. There is, we're doing a live webinar, a live virtual demonstration of EXOGEN a week from today at the same time for anybody who wants to join, see the product being put on an athlete, walking through it. It's a very engaging session. So any coaches or people that were listening that want to see that virtual trial go on, please sign up. The email will have that. There is a bonus coupon for a discount for anybody who took part today. And also there's a prize giveaway. And we're looking, somebody has won a pair of EXOGEN calf sleeves, and I'm going to read out the name here in about 1 second. And then be sure to follow us if you do on any of our social media platforms and sign up to that email, because we are going to send you out, our very first time, we're going to be sharing our entire research booklet, which JC updates every 3 months. And there's a lot of valuable information on that. So that wraps us. I'm just looking to see if the team has picked the winner of the free calf sleeves as a result of this. And not to worry, we've gone on 1 sec. Let me see if it's in WhatsApp here. No, I don't see it on the Zoom. Here it is. Okay, sorry, they just said not yet. They're going to announce it after. So some lucky listener is going to get a nice email and a pair of calf sleeves to go and start smashing around them. Again, thanks very much, both of you. Thank you to the LILA team for putting this all together, Jen and Sue. And we'll talk to everybody soon. That's a wrap.
Thanks, Joe.
Thank you.
Cheers, folks.